Hey everybody, welcome back to Multiplayer Vault, brought to you by Baritone Studios. I'm Sky,
And I'm Evan.
and today we are going to be talking about Dead by Daylight. But here we are, and we're bringing to you the spooky game of Dead by Daylight. So Evan, what do you have any experience with the game? I mean, you should. We're doing an episode on it, but tell me about it.
Of course, yeah. I actually, back when it came out, I played 2 matches and then I didn't like it because I was playing by myself. I was playing with random people. So I quit and then picked it up back last year, and I was playing it almost every single night with my one of my roommates from college. So I actually have a lot of experience playing, and it is very, very fun. I'm super excited to talk about it today.
Now, me myself, I have not played this game a lot. I think actually the last time we played was a few weeks ago, right?
Yep.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, and that was my first time playing the game, and I'm like, this game is scary, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm like fixing generators and stuff. I don't know what's happening, and I think I screamed a couple times.
Me and Francis kept yelling at you, like, you gotta do this, you gotta do this. And you're like,
Yeah, I'm like,
what?
I have no idea what I'm doing. But yeah, it was still fun. So let's say we get into this episode, Evan.
I say, let's do it.
All right. What's scarier than a cosmic horror? I mean, come on, we all know Lovecraft and his pantheon of godlike terrors that often fail to be described by spoken words. I'm sure the developers of Dead by Daylight had the exact same idea when crafting the story for their game. The entity is an all-knowing, all-present being that travels across the universe, corrupting and consuming worlds. Not all worlds will satiate its hunger, though. Only the darkest and most depraved worlds draw its attention. Naturally, one of the worlds it has set its figurative eyes on, because the entity has no eyes to speak of, is Earth.
Let's walk through the process of how the entity consumes a world, because it does not happen instantly. First, the entity finds a world that it finds suitable to consume. Once it does, it begins to reach across its realm in the world by influencing its inhabitants. It does this by coercing them into depravity and murderous intent, making its victims want to commit horrific atrocities, and therefore making its world darker and allowing the entity to siphon the hatred that is seeded from the victim. Once the entity believes that its victim caused enough chaos and pain in its world, it pulls the victim into one of its realms, called the Trials, which we'll get into more later, and now the victim has leveled up into a killer.
Not all killers are the same. Some need more coercing than others, and some see the entity as a dream come true in mass murder. A killer named the Trapper needs constant threats of torture to be convinced to kill. While someone like Michael Myers, yes, Halloween's Michael Myers, is just plain evil and is more than happy to do the entity's bidding. All the killers are different and all have their own little idiosyncrasies. At one point, the entity had its clutches on a man living in Japan and influenced him to kill his wife and attempt to kill his daughter. During the struggle, though, the hatred from his daughter caused the entity to change its mind, abandoning the father and turning his daughter into a killer called the Spirit.
Sometimes the entity isn't content with just one nut job per killer slot. A boy named Frank was within the insidious grasp of the entity, which led to his manipulation with his own group of youngsters, ordering them to commit crimes and bully one another. And they murdered too, but they bullied other kids. Probably called them poop faces, stupid heads, the terrible stuff. Not to be outdone, the entity scooped up all 4 of the homicidal hooligans and they all became the Legion. While they were all technically different beings, the Legion is here for one thing and one thing only: to kill. For crying out loud, the entity isn't shy of expanding its own paraversal self to a killer's own pocket dimensions. The Nightmare, that's Nightmare with a capital N, brings people into the dream world where the victims are susceptible to whatever traps and terrors the nightmare has in store. The spirit world, controlled by the Wraith and the Nurse, is identical to the entity's realm, but the victims are rendered nearly blind. Demogorgon from Stranger Things can bring its victims into the Upside Down, where a bunch of trippy weird stuff can all occur. It's just crazy.
Now that the entity has a nice lineup of killers, the barriers between it and the world begins to weaken more and more as the killers do more terrible things. Some places in the world become completely connected with the entity, and it's at these points that random people can get sucked into the realm of the entity. As the world gets weaker, the entity is able to corrupt it completely and keep the inhabitants it corrupted and the people that got trapped. And during the whole consuming thing, the trials have already gone underway.
If someone can think of the most emotional, most desperate situation, only one thing came to the entity's mind, which was escape room. and that's where the trials come in. The trials is the whole event of the game, and it consists of survivors and killers. The killers are the aforementioned psychos that the entity coerced into becoming multiversal sadists, and the survivors are those unlucky to have stumbled upon the realm of the entity. A lot of what the realm of the entity is based on the perception of human victims, because right now the entity is trying to consume Earth and its current victims are mainly humans.
Before the trials begin, survivors gather around a subworld called the campfire. I'm sure if this was some other alien race the entity was trying to scare the bejesus out of, it would be like a space fire or something. But since these are human survivors, it's just a campfire. The killer is teleported to the outskirts of the campfire where it can't get any closer than just a few dozen yards from their survivors so they can size up their prey. Once everything is ready, everyone teleports away and the trials begin. The survivors must activate 5 generators to escape, and the killer must sacrifice all the survivors. In a game, if you win as the survivor, it's all fine and dandy until you realize that you're trapped. The entity just sends the survivors, dead or alive, back to the campfire, memories wiped and completely regenerated.
Yes, that means as a survivor, even if you die, you are in an endless cycle of attempting to escape one near-death experience after another. That's how the entity gains its energy to keep consuming worlds. That's right, folks, we got ourselves a good old emotion vampire on our hands. Why else would the entity set up this whole ordeal? For fun? The entity feeds off of strong emotions, getting hate and excitement from the killers and desperation and hope from the survivors.
To add the gut-wrenching creepiness of this whole affair, when the killers sacrifice the survivor might make it out alive thanks to the entity reviving them, but a part of that survivor's soul is extracted. So eventually, a survivor will be rendered soulless and deemed not useful to the entity and is discarded to the void. Now, do we really have to explain the void to y'all? It's exactly what it sounds like, a space of nothing where soulless husks live for the rest of eternity, and only 2 are known to have escaped the void. Those 2 are Vigo and the Observer.
Let's start with our main man, Vigo. This guy is a bona fide inventor and researcher who studies the entity and its biological aspects, most notably discovering that the entity is infected by some cosmological disease called the Blight every year, creating these cankers which form into pustules across the being's realms. It was with the liquid from these pustules that he was able to escape the void when he injected himself with some. Now I know that you're about to throw up all over the place. Trust me, we are too. But Vigo found something more interesting and less grotesque than interdimensional pimples. This was the fog, and Vigo found out that this was one of the manifestations of the entity. The fog not only surrounds the realms of the entity's creation, but it also contains the thoughts of everyone it has corrupted and the world it consumed for the past eon, including Vigo.
Vigo and the Observer used their mental connection to the fog to bend it to their will, and that's how they've been able to evade the entity's watchful eye in its own realms. Now what's up with this Observer guy? He's the guy that reads all the little lore tidbits for the player when they open them up. He's also the guy that lives in this prison sub-realm, obscured from the entity called the Tower. He knows all, sees all. He's also probably not human, by the way.
But how did this guy get here anyway? Unlike Vigo, we actually know. The Observer, with a capital O, became fascinated with the entity when he became interested with Celestials in general. What are Celestials? I don't know, but it can be assumed that there are other beings like the entity out there, for better or worse. This guy found himself so enthralled with the entity that when he witnessed it do its classical world-consuming trick, I don't know what other kind of freaks finds that interesting besides, what can I do to get rid of this world-consuming sadistic emotion vampire? But apparently the Observer was that guy that was interested in that trick.
And from all accounts, that being the official DVD wiki and just the lore in general, the Observer went against a body called the Council, quote unquote. This council has never been explained, so no one but the devs know what it is. For now, it's the group of people that sent the Observer to his own little pocket prison where he sits and occasionally runs around with his fog-defying gadget, dredging up nuggets of info about the celestial terror that he finds so cool.
These guys aren't the only ones who found the entity worth studying. One of the killers, known as the Blight, found himself interested specifically with the disease that infected the entity, also called the Blight. I'm sure he thought, wow, what could be so powerful that an omniscient being needs to purge like it's about to get a colonoscopy? Like any insane murderous psychopath, this killer began to inject himself with the Blight until he became horrifically mutated and unrecognizable compared to his former self, becoming the Blight, but not the disease. the killer.
Will the entity consume Earth and keep the killers for itself? Will Vigo find a way to stop the corruption by turning the fog against the entity? Or will the developers just keep this train going until no one cares anymore and the story being left unfinished? Find out next time on The Terror of the Transcendental Tyrant. And with that concludes the lore of Dead by Daylight. So now on to the critic's review by Multiplayer Vault's resident researcher, game critic, and social media manager, Francis.
In Dead by Daylight, the entity feeds off its victims' strongest emotions. This is also true in reality, as people with malicious intent can take advantage of us in our most vulnerable state and capitalize on our hatred or fear. However, what the entity and those bad people fail to understand is that our feelings do not define us. We may have moments of fear or weakness, quick flashes of anger or hatred, but these impulses do not make us who we are. Feelings are just that. Feelings, but it is the actions we take based on those feelings which shape us. As long as the acts we commit come from a place of peace and good intent, the entity will never take advantage of us and never break our resolve.
Thank you, Francis. Everyone please give a round of applause for Francis.
We snap. This is one of those poetry reading bars.
Except I can't snap, so I'll just golf clap.
I'll go for it.
There you go.
So thank you all for joining us for this Dead by Daylight episode of Multiplayer Vault. Research for this episode was done by John Ekstrom and Francis. Audio direction was done by yours truly, Evan Barr. If you enjoy the podcast or would like to heavily criticize us, feel free to reach out. You can find our socials down below or just look up Baritone Studios with bear, spelled like a bear, on Instagram, YouTube, Carrier Pigeon, the entities,
The Fog.
Yeah. Also, make sure to give us a review on whatever your listening platform is. Not only will it help us reach other potential listeners, but it also lets us know you enjoy our content and would like to see more. And speaking of more, make sure to stay tuned for our discussion episode coming up next on Dead by Daylight.
Thank you for all tuning in to our episode of Dead by Daylight. I'm Sky.
And I'm Evan.
And this is Multiplayer Vault.